The New York Mets will have to win one of a two-game doubleheader on Monday in order to punch their ticket to the 2024 playoffs. Welcome in to another episode of the Bleav In Mets podcast. Chris Schubert, Jack McKessie here with you as we recap it wasn't a terrible weekend. It wasn't a great weekend for the New York Mets, but they put themselves in a position to where they only have to win one game on Monday against the Atlanta Braves. We know what the Atlanta Braves are going to do with their pitching matchup. We don't know what the New York Mets are going to do. We'll discuss that. We'll preview the two-game doubleheader, but of course we have to start with what was a wild weekend of scoreboard watching the Mets struggle for 2 days. And then on Sunday, when we are recording this podcast, they found the urgency that was missing for the entire week. After that Philly series, they found it on Sunday in a big way and get a 5-0 victory. Jack, can I get a vibe check going into a two-game doubleheader in which we need to tell the listeners you're leaving town in the morning. You are leaving the country. You are not going to be a part of the Bleav In Mets this week. I'm going to do solo shows, however this season ends or if it continues. You're leaving the country during the most important two games of the season.
Yeah, so Chris, I booked a trip to London with some of my friends back in April, and things looked very different for the New York Mets back then. I thought there was no chance I was going to have any issues with missing any games, and now there's a chance. So I guess vibe check after today, I have more confidence than I have in about a week now, just based on how the Mets played today, Sunday. But going into a doubleheader against the Braves in Atlanta, where once again we have the callback to 2022 of the only thing that the Mets have to not do is get swept. They only have to win one single game in Atlanta, which was kind of what we had that's the case about a week ago before the series was initially supposed to start. And I'm just nervous. I don't know. It just feels like another situation where I could get my heart broken or I could be over the moon. I have no idea how to feel. My brain is in a blender trying to figure out all the clinching scenarios after the first couple of games of the Brewers series and the Padres series and the Braves Royals series. I'm a mess.
This is going to be a very, very long 24 hours for Mets fans. And I am already having trouble sleeping, considering what's been on the line the last couple nights. I'm the first person to admit it. I have a lot of fandoms in sports, in not just baseball, but in football and in soccer and in all sorts of different things. There is nothing that I am a fan of more than this New York Mets team. And so this is the thing that's been keeping me up at night. And I'm out on the West Coast. That first game starts at 10 a.m. I will be in my office, and I got to tell you, the door's going to be shut to my office. Everybody's going to be leaving me alone because on that tablet is going to be the first game of a doubleheader, and hopefully it means that the Mets win that first one and that second one. I don't even need to watch. Just Carlos Mendoza, do whatever you want. If you want to play, Carlos, you go ahead and you go out there. But let's talk about this weekend because for the New York Mets, starting on Friday, it was pretty simple. Don't get swept. If possible, win 2 out of 3, and you put yourself in a really good spot. And the Mets got a lot of the things that they needed to have happen. The Diamondbacks dropped the first 2 of their series to the Padres, completely opening the door for the Mets to have this completely clinched by today. But unfortunately, the Mets dropped the first 2 games of this series. And you have in our notes here that you described it as trying too hard. That's fair. I just watched those first 2 games, and I felt like if you told me one of the teams was fighting for their playoff lives and another team was in a position of being on cruise control into the playoffs, in the first 2 games, the roles were reversed. The Brewers looked like the team that needed to have the urgency, needed to get those games, needed to get those victories. They managed them that way. They played that way. They ran hard on the base paths. They absolutely obliterated the Mets in the first 2 games, stealing bases. They just had an energy and a spark that told me, hey, this team's trying to play for something, even though there was absolutely nothing for them to play for when both teams took the field on Friday night. And the Mets, it took 2 days for them to snap into it, and they finally got to there on Sunday, and that put them in a position where they have to win one game tomorrow.
That's true. When I wrote down the trying too hard in the notes here, it was because when I watched the Mets the first 2 games, it just seemed the team just reeked of desperation. Like you could tell that everyone in that clubhouse was thinking, man, we really need to win, 1 or 2 of these games so we don't have to play at all on Monday. Hopefully. It just felt like everyone from the rotation to the lineup was pressing a little bit too hard. There were hitters that were coming up to bat that were just too desperate to get on base and swinging at things that they just weren't swinging at a week ago. Some non-competitive at bats. It was just really frustrating. It really harkened back to 2022 for me. I hate to bring it up, but everyone is thinking it. Mm-hmm. Looking at, going into a series where you have to avoid getting swept, and that's the only thing on everyone's minds rather than let's play the way that we've played the last 2 weeks, the last month, the last 2 months. Because going into this Brewers series, and I said it in our last episode, I had so much faith that they were going to be able to take care of business when it mattered most and when they needed to, because this team has battled adversity throughout the year and someone has always stepped up. And through those first 2 games, it was just everyone was trying so hard to step up that no one did, and it just turned into a complete mess. Obviously, they turned things around in game 3, but those first 2 games were brutal, and it was hard for me to feel any confidence going forward.
Let's go back to the beginning of this series as we'll recap the 3 games. And Friday night was about as bad of a game as you can have. And well, I'll tell a little bit of a personal story. You and I text a lot during these games. You and I are constantly just sharing thoughts and texting each other, and we're watching different feeds. I'm sometimes ahead of you. You're most of the time ahead of me. So we spoil things. There's just a lot of banter that goes on during these games between the two of us. So I started watching the game at home in the chair that I'm sitting in right now, and I watched Sean Manaea just absolutely implode in the first inning. And I watched Rhys Hoskins, a guy, and I had a very good friend who messaged me this. Now, Rhys Hoskins, notorious Mets killer. In the offseason, I campaigned to this friend over and over and over again. I wanted the Mets to sign Rhys Hoskins to be their DH over and over and over again. This friend, and without giving too many details, Jack, you know exactly the person that I'm talking about, dug up my old messages to him about this player and sent them to me after Rhys Hoskins hit the first inning grand slam. And I said, thanks, didn't really need this right now, because I said that Rhys Hoskins was going to hit like 30 homers and then be able to parlay it into a decent free agent contract. So Rhys Hoskins delivers a fatal blow to this Mets team in the first inning, as Sean Manaea doesn't have it, goes 3 2/3, gives up 5 earned runs, and the Mets are down 4-0 in a blink, and it was over. They tried to make it competitive. They had some opportunities. We can talk about the terrible called third strike to Francisco Alvarez. I don't even know if it's worth it to do that now with just how much is on the line tomorrow. It's just not even worth it. It's a bad call. It's brutal. Ramon DeJesus had a really bad night behind the plate, but it was just this feeling, and I didn't really feel it on Tuesday, but I felt it on Friday of, oh no, the Mets turned to their ace, and their ace couldn't even put them in a position to be competitive. That scared me for the weekend. So they lose 8-4 on Friday and Saturday, and maybe I'm on an island all by myself, and Jack will tell me that I'm wrong here. I didn't think the Mets, at least from Jose Quintana's perspective, pitched bad enough for the Mets to not be in that game. I know the box score isn't great. He only lasted 4 1/3, and he gave up the 2 runs. But in a playoff type atmosphere, Jose Quintana kept them in that game to where they had a chance to even it up. The bats just were non-existent. When you had Francisco Lindor, Mark Vientos, Brendan Nimmo, and Pete Alonso go a combined 0 for 15 in game 2. There's not a game on this planet that they win when those 4 players go 0 for 15. It was never going to happen.
I was in the same boat as you. I felt like the first game the lineup specifically was trying to push too hard because they had to play from behind because of that Rhys Hoskins grand slam, which, by the way, you mentioned you wanting to sign him in the offseason. The Mets got one of their killers in Jesse Winker on the team. I wish that somehow they figured out a way to get Hoskins, because it would have been such a avoidance of a terrible moment. But the first game, it felt like the lineup was pressing too hard to play from behind. And in the second game, it felt like that kind of carried over a little bit to the point where, like you said, I thought Quintana was actually very good. Again, box score is what it is, but given what the situation was and given the pressure and given, how he has had a tendency to have some kind of blow up starts, especially earlier in the season, I thought he did really well. And the lineup just was completely out of it. They were incapable of really delivering at any point. Even the bullpen was solid. I felt like on Saturday, the Brewers were not hitting incredibly well, but the Mets were not hitting at all.
You had Phil Maton come in after Jose Quintana and put up some zeros. Like things didn't go sideways until Reed Garrett came in the 8th inning. Like right. For 7 innings, this game was 2-0. Like the Mets were in this. The Mets had a chance, and they blew 2 opportunities where they got the leadoff man to second base, and the bottom part of this lineup just couldn't come through. And the problem was the bottom part of the lineup had a backup catcher, a defensive first center fielder, and a rookie who's playing in his 11th game. And Starling Marte, who continues to take some of the worst at-bats in key moments that I've ever seen a player make.
Although he did have one of those 2 hits on Saturday, right?
Sure, but the first inning when Pete, or yeah, I think it was the first or second inning when Pete gets onto second after the throw into the stands,
Yeah.
he pulls the ball. He got pull happy, and then if you pull the ball, Pete can't advance, and now a sac fly doesn't get a run on the board, and it's just. And then in the game on Sunday today, as we're recording this, he tried to bunt twice. I had no idea. I have no idea what Starling Marte is doing up there. Just uncompetitive at bats at times, and then whatever he did on Sunday. But when the bottom part of your lineup is constructed in that way, again, because you couldn't put JD Martinez in there because you had Francisco Lindor DH, and you didn't know if you were going to have Francisco Alvarez available because of the back. That's the way the bottom part of your lineup looks. And then when the top part of the lineup, the guys that you are supposed to be your superstars, go a combined 0 for 15, that's how you get into a situation where you look up, it's the 8th inning, and it's 6-0, or it's 6-0, and you're facing the meat of the Brewers bullpen because they were going to use them all on Saturday to not have to use them on Sunday and give them 2 days off. That's the situation they found themselves in. So the 2 opportunities that they had to get runs on the board and make this a competitive game, they missed both of those opportunities, and then they just folded up. They just couldn't get anything going after that.
It was what it was. I was kind of done with the game after the 7th inning or whenever it was when Reed Garrett came in, and the first run he gave up, I immediately knew, like, whatever. Sometimes the team just doesn't have it. I was kind of holding out hope they'd have another Blue Jays versus Bowden Francis-esque comeback in the 9th inning. Was not in the cards. The biggest takeaway I had from the first 2 games was, my God, I hope they are able to flush those and do something right on Sunday, because this team, again, 2 years ago, that was not something they were able to do. A blow up performance by who you think is your ace, and a lineup that's pressing too hard to get runs on the board and being completely unproductive. So I was honestly dreading coming into Sunday because I had no idea what the team was going to look like.
Well, we get to Sunday, we get to today's game, and the Mets win 5-0. And it was from the first inning, you just knew that somebody said something. And
Right.
It was probably multiple somebodies, but somebody said something. Lindor draws a leadoff walk, immediately steals a base, hustles on Nimmo's single into center field, has to be helped up by teammates up off a home plate after he slides because he's clearly not 100%. And it was very clear. They got a message. Either the players themselves delivered or Carlos Mendoza delivered it, but there was a message of, we have to play with our hair on fire. We have to, whatever happens is going to happen. We're either going to win or we're going to lose, but we need to play our brand of baseball. We need to play with our hair on fire. We need to go out there and create the result. We can't let the result come to us. And you saw that in the first inning, and they only get the 1 run across. But I think getting that first run across in the way that they did with their superstar player who's battling a bad back, who's clearly not 100%, but is going out there and making things happen. Nimmo stole another base in the first inning. Like, they were making things happen. And I think that was the page flipping to, okay, we're back to playing our style of baseball. Let's go get this. And listen, you texted me about it. We were talking back and forth. Dave, it's not John Maine 2007, but it's close what David Peterson did today, because he was elite. 7 innings, no runs, 1 hit, 8 strikeouts. Again, it's not John Maine's 7 plus 14 strikeouts in a gotta have it game when you have a 4 ERA for the season. It was not that type of performance, but it was pretty darn close because he was bad his last time out against the Phillies. 2 of his last 3 starts have gone kind of sideways for him. And yet when the team needed him the most, when the team needed him to bail out Jose Quintana, to bail out Sean Manaea, to bail out Luis Severino from Tuesday, to bail out the bullpen and not have them throw a ton when you know what's coming tomorrow with 2 games. Because they knew walking in the building today that even if they won, there was a decent chance they were playing at least 1 game tomorrow in Atlanta. It's now going to be 2. And David Peterson delivered. And so for all the negativity that is floated around David Peterson in his career, to come through with that start in that moment, again, I will use the term, it was an elite performance from David Peterson today.
It was just unbelievable because, I mean, it was exactly what we were hoping for coming into this series, right? I remember we were talking about, the last time he went out there, he had a rough start, but before that, he was playing well, and we were worried that the stretch of good starts being interrupted by bad starts might somehow eventually end up with 2 bad starts in a row. And to go out there and throw 7 innings, I mean, that alone, just getting that kind of length, regardless of the strikeout count, regardless of the lack of runs, being able to have that kind of length with two games that might mean the entire season on Monday in a doubleheader, being able to save the bullpen, being able to save all of your best relievers, except for, Diaz going out there to shake off some of the rust. It's just the kind of performance that if the Mets are able to win on Monday, we're going to look back at this David Peterson start and go, wow, that was crucial. He stepped up in a big moment, and you kind of have to consider him to be a part of your playoff rotation now, which going into the season, I would have called you crazy if that were the case.
It certainly feels like if he is going to pitch again, it would be in game 3. It would be on, what would that be, Thursday?
Yeah.
Would be when that start would come up. So it would be on short rest, but he certainly feels like if he is going to pitch in the wild card series, that's when it would be. Let's talk about it, because you and I texted back and forth about it. You weren't necessarily a fan. I've attempted to make the case to you as to why I'm okay with it, but the Mets did use Edwin Diaz tonight. They did use him in the 9th inning of a game that was 5-0. And I will tell you, I think I'm okay with it. And maybe I've convinced myself of it by talking it out loud, but he last pitched on Sunday. 7 days ago was the last time that Edwin Diaz came into a game. And let's just look at tonight, because tonight was a high leverage situation. Despite the score being 5-0, the Mets had to get 3 outs. They had to win the baseball game. They could not afford a loss. Edwin Diaz could not afford a blow up. And in that moment, after not pitching for a week, Edwin Diaz was sitting 97-98 with his fastball. So if you didn't pitch him tonight and you saved him because it was 5-0 and it's not a save situation, don't use your high leverage reliever, you then were going to have that version of him in an even more important game tomorrow, either in game 1 or game 2, where he's shaking off that rust and throwing 97-98. Where instead, you get him out there. He gets to have a good appearance. He threw it 26 pitches. That's not ideal. But he was able to kind of shake off some of that rust. And I expect that when we see him tomorrow, because I think we will see him no matter what in one of the 2 games tomorrow, if not both. He said he has openly raised his hand and said, I'm available for both games tomorrow. So, and he is preparing himself to be ready for both games tomorrow. That he's going to be more the 99, 100, 100 plus Edwin Diaz. And so with that being the idea, I think, of why Carlos Mendoza used him, I'm good. I would rather use my closer and not have him pitch for the first time after 8 days off in the most critical moment of the year, and he's maybe a little rusty with his fastball, and he grooves one to Matt Olson. I would rather that not be the case. Thank you very much.
I agree with you, but the thing that makes me scared, I guess, like to play a devil's advocate, is just looking at what the schedule is ahead / what it could be if the Mets win one of these games. I am terrified of the following situation being the Mets are up or tied in the 9th inning of game 1 on Monday. Diaz has to come in because it's a crucial situation. And now he said that he's available for both games. Let's say something goes wrong in game 1. They need him again in game 2 in they're up 1 into the 9th inning. Okay. They win game 2 and they move on to the playoffs. But what happens if, there are 3 more situations that you need Diaz in the wild card round? Because now you're looking at a guy who not only has had 0 rest, but might have just pitched 2 games in a row on Monday after having pitched on Sunday. And I just worry about how much that can take a toll. Even if the Mets end up advancing to the playoffs through the wild card round, I just worry about how that amount of usage can chip away at his effectiveness. Even though, yes, he's gotten the rust off, but looking forward, is he really going to pitch 5 games in 4 days or, 6 games in 5 days? That's just what scares me, is because we've seen that Diaz, he had the durability issue after the injury last year. He was rusty coming into this year. I'm glad that he got the rust off, but I'm so nervous about what that means going forward if he's needed frequently in the playoffs, which we assume that he kind of will be.
Sure, but you also have to be in a position to go forward before you can actually make those decisions. And I think that's ultimately, at the end of the day, I don't disagree with anything you said there, because you could look up and Edwin Diaz could have been used 4 days in a row, and then all of a sudden he's not at 100% efficiency, and now he blows a game for the team. But here's ultimately the way that I feel about it. If the Mets are to win one of the 2 games tomorrow, and we'll save our prediction for the end when we preview the series, or the whatever that we call this 2-game round robin to try to figure out who's going to play where on Tuesday. Unless they sweep, right? Because if they sweep, then they win both games and he's used both days. They're going to lose one of the games. So he won't pitch in one of those two games. That's a loss. And I hate to just say out loud that the Mets are going to lose a playoff game, but unless they sweep, and if they sweep, then he gets days off on the back end, then they're going to lose a game that he's more than likely not going to pitch in. So you're going to build in a day off anyway. Now, the best thing you could do, the most ideal scenario for Carlos Mendoza is the Mets go out there tomorrow, and I don't want to do the preview ahead of the preview, and they just get all over Schwellenbach early, and they run the score up, and they're up by 4 or 5 runs, and then Edwin Diaz can be preserved for the absolute last second. That's the ideal scenario for tomorrow. But they used him, and I think I'm good with it. I think I'm okay with it because, again, I think he's going to be good enough to be elite Edwin Diaz tomorrow, and that's when the Mets need elite Edwin Diaz right now. They need to worry about Tuesday through Thursday when they get there. So they win a game. The Diamondbacks win one game against the Padres, and the Braves lose. And so we are now in a position where the Diamondbacks have finished their season. They are like the golfer after 18 at the Masters who's put their score up on the board. It's up there. They can't put up a better number than their 89 wins. They cannot put up a better score. The New York Mets and the Atlanta Braves are both sitting at 88 wins. If both teams win a game tomorrow, they will both get to 89, and they both have the tiebreaker over the Arizona Diamondbacks, and the Arizona Diamondbacks will be going home. This was when we talked originally about all of the scenarios for this outcome. This was the thing that I thought was the most unfair. The Diamondbacks could get screwed here because, and we will segue this nicely into our preview, is that this team, that the team that wins game one, has literally nothing to play for in game two. Zero. And the Braves have told you how they feel. Spencer Schwellenbach is pitching game one. They are only going to pitch Chris Sale in game two if game two is of importance to them. So if they go out there and they win game one, Chris Sale's not pitching game two. You know who else isn't pitching game two? Spencer Schwellenbach's not going to pitch game two after pitching game one. So they're just going to throw somebody out there, somebody who's not going to be on their wild card roster, who's not going to be their starters in game one of this wild card. They're going to throw somebody out there, an opener, whichever of their other 3 starters they just aren't going to have go in the wild card series. They'll probably sit Matt Olson. They'll sit guys because they know they're going to have to play another game tomorrow. They're not going to want to have those guys out there playing another 9-inning game and have that on their legs. So the Diamondbacks get screwed here because there's no incentive for one of these two teams to try to play for a sweep. If the Mets win, guess what? Whichever starter they don't pitch in game one, you're sitting down. Francisco Lindor, you're not playing. Brendan Nimmo, take a seat. Mark Vientos, have a nice day off. Eddie Alvarez, get in there. Like, Luis Torrens, you're catching all 9 innings. I don't care if you get banged up. You're in there. Like, there's no incentive for these teams because of the way it broke down. Once a team wins game one, game two means nothing to the other team. It means everything for the Arizona Diamondbacks, but it means nothing to the team that wins game one. And I think that's the thing that's the most unfair. Now, I'm not here to tell you about fair. I don't care about fair right now. I need my team to win a baseball game tomorrow and find a way into the playoffs. So, with that being said, Schwellenbach is going to go game one. They have made that announcement. Chris Sale will go in game two only if it is of importance for the Atlanta Braves, meaning they lose game one. Now, we just saw Spencer Schwellenbach take on this New York Mets lineup, and he was pretty good. He has been pretty good all year against them. You have our notes here. 14 innings pitched, 5 hits, 1 earned run, 15 strikeouts, and 4 walks and 2 starts against the Mets this year. Now, you have a starter listed for the Mets. Is this a confirmed starter? I have not seen that this is the confirmed starter.
I haven't seen anything from the team, but I've seen multiple beat writers, including from The Athletic and SNY, and I want to say like Newsday, all have Tyler McGill pitching game one for the Mets on Monday.
Do you like that?
I think so. So I've been thinking while you were talking about what things look like for the Mets going into Monday, and the more I think about it, honestly, and I don't want to be negative. I don't want to be, hoping for a loss. But things for the Mets generally are better than they are for the Braves and for the Diamondbacks, looking at what the situation is going into Monday. So right now, the Braves have their starter that has dominated the Mets all season going in game one. If the Braves win game one, that means that they were not pitching Chris Sale in game two.
Yep.
They're letting a lot of their starters get rest.
Yep. And
the Mets can pitch who we probably would agree is the better starting pitcher in a absolute must win in Luis Severino against a Braves lineup that has taken the day off. And on top of that, the Mets have nothing to play for in terms of seeding, right? If they win game one, they don't care about game two, which means the Braves would get the tiebreaker for the season series against the Mets, and the Mets would end up in Milwaukee. If the Mets lose game one, the best they can do is win game two and still end up in Milwaukee. The only way the Mets have to travel across the country to play the Padres is if they sweep the Braves.
Which is why it's even worse that they're playing these two games and they matter to only the Mets and the Braves and the Diamondbacks have to sit at home, is because if the Mets win game one, there's an actual incentive to not win the second game. So you only have to fly to Milwaukee instead of needing to fly to San Diego, because the Braves would then win the tiebreaker against you and have to make that long travel. See, this is where the Diamondbacks are the team that has gotten screwed the worst here with the MLB's decision to make this a doubleheader. Because then the Mets, if they win game one, or if the Braves win game one, the incentive is to lose. The incentive is to not win so that the other team has to travel to San Diego.
Yes, exactly. I mean, and the Braves can only go to San Diego because they won that game on Tuesday.
Yeah.
There is no scenario in which the Braves can go to Milwaukee. It's either they go to San Diego or they go home.
Unless the Mets win both games. Oh, you're right. The Braves are not going to Milwaukee. Correct.
Right. So
because if the Mets win both games and the Braves are out and the Diamondbacks are going to Milwaukee.
So that's why I don't really hate this McGill decision for game one. I know logically, you'd rather win game one and not have to worry at all about playing a second game. You get the extra rest. You get to, start making your travel plans to Milwaukee or whatever. But if the Mets lose game one, they're still in a very good position to win game two because of all the reasons I outlined. The Braves are going to be resting everyone. They're not going to be pitching Chris Sale. They're probably not even going to be pitching some of their top bullpen arms because they're going to want those for when they go to San Diego. So yes, but like Severino, I think is the better starter. If the Mets really want to have, the afternoon off in Atlanta, then they should try to win game one. But I almost kind of see this as the Mets being like, we're hoping for the best in game one, but we know that the Braves are going to take off for game two, or we're planning for that to happen. And obviously they've gotten burned in the past with a team with nothing to play for and how the Brewers played this weekend. But I think that the situation going into game two for the Mets is kind of ideal regardless. And again, to reemphasize, I feel really bad for Diamondbacks fans right now because they are getting completely screwed over by what's going on with this doubleheader situation. Because again, there is zero chance for a team that wins game one to win game two.
And the interesting thing about it is the Diamondbacks had something at their disposal today that I don't think is going to be available to the New York Mets. They said before the game that Zach Allen was available out of the bullpen if he was needed, because they needed to treat it like a must-win because they needed to win to even force this scenario. Zach Allen last pitched in a start on the 25th. So today's the 29th as we're recording this. So it was on 3 full days of rest. It would have been on the 4th day, and he didn't throw a side bullpen to be ready for this. Unfortunately, the Mets don't have that option because unless you're going to have Sean Manaea pitch on even less rest than that in a bullpen outing, that's the only option you have. Jose Quintana is not available to you. You're not going to use the other guy of Sevy and McGill in replacement of the other person. You're going to have that person ready for game two. So in theory, I think what we are going to see is the moment there's trouble, Jose Butto is going to be getting ready in the bullpen. Like it's going to be the Jose Butto, you need to give us 3+ innings. Like that, that to me feels like the way it's going to immediately go. That the break glass in case of emergency option is if Tyler McGill's struggling early, it's going to be Jose Butto like as the quick hook, and he's going to get McGill out of there. If McGill starts game one. Now, Sevy didn't pitch all that great against Atlanta on Tuesday, but I also don't think he pitched as poorly as his box score indicated, right? He had the weird play where Alvarez got in the way. That led to the run. The double hit off the bat that led to some more scoring. Yes, he gave up the home run to Michael Harris, but I mean, two of the hits that really, hurt him were just fluke baseball things that happened. So I think he was better than the box score indicated. And so I don't think here's what I will say. I don't think there is one of the two starters I feel more confident in over the other in a way that would make me feel one way or the other about starting them. I feel, and my confidence in any Mets pitcher right now, no offense to any of them, even though they've been great, is zero because I'm just nervous and I've been through this before. Like we've just been through this so many times. So I'm just nervous. And so I just don't have any confidence. Like I didn't have any confidence today that they were going to win the baseball game. That's just, my natural reaction of the way this is going. So I don't think it necessarily matters. But again, I think you have to get the first one, even though all of the stuff we outlined about the way the winning team is going to handle the second game, or at least we think is going to handle the second game. I don't need that kind of pressure. I just don't need it. I just don't think it's going to help.
I mean, yeah, I even though I'm saying it, and I think that things can go well just in terms of on paper for game 2, just based off the way that the Brewers series went with the team against a team with nothing to play for. And, I mentioned it at the beginning of the episode, just the way that the lineup was pressing too hard, the way that the pressure really got to the pitching staff. Yeah, I think ultimately winning game 1, obviously for both teams is going to be an immense weight off of whoever wins shoulders. And especially for the Mets playing on the road in a stadium that they've had a lot of trouble with in these moments in recent years. Game 1 is just going to be huge. And I'm terrified about the state of my mental health if they lose game 1 going into game 2. I'm going to be a complete emotional wreck.
Well, are you going to be on a plane by then, or?
So yeah, my flight leaves at 3:45 Central tomorrow, Monday, which is around the start of game 2.
So you'll know what they need to do in game 2.
I'll know what they need to do in game 2, but I don't know if they lose game 1, I won't know what happens until I get to London.
Oh, that's a long plane ride. If that's the case, that's going to be a long plane ride for you.
Yeah.
I think what gives me confidence that they can win one of the 2 games is Lindor looked good today.
Yeah.
Francisco Alvarez looked good today. JD Martinez got 2 hits, and you can feel it, because you sent me before the game today Carlos Mendoza's quote about JD. We brought him here for moments like this. We know he's struggling, but we have confidence in him. We believe in him. And he immediately responded to that with a 2-hit performance. Could you imagine if JD Martinez comes through with an RBI to put the Mets in front tomorrow? Like, that's the type of stuff that just feels like what happened to this team this year with how everything is going their way. And so to see all of that, and I don't want to be negative, but the next big Pete Alonso hit will be the first big Pete Alonso hit I've seen in a really long time.
Yeah.
He is somebody that absolutely has to step up for this team right now. He has to. Yeah. He needs to come up with a big hit. And again, they don't have to win both. They just need to win one. And they need to make that house of horrors not a house of horrors anymore. Because guess what? You win one of those 2 games and you're celebrating a playoff berth, it's no longer a house of horrors. You did it. You have overcame the struggles of that building. Now, here's a weird thing. The teams would never agree to this. But again, there's zero incentive to sweep. So it's going to be this kind of wink, wink, nudge, nudge, you win one, we win one kind of thing. Like, I just don't see a scenario, unless there's just a complete meltdown, where one team sweeps a doubleheader tomorrow. And that's where the Diamondbacks, I think, they get hosed, because there's no incentive for a team to sweep. There's no incentive to win both games. If you're the Mets, there is zero incentive to win both games and then travel to San Diego. The full incentive is win game 1, lose game 2, go back to Milwaukee. Not to say Milwaukee's a better team to face than San Diego. I think I'd rather face San Diego. But from a travel perspective, and all of the travel this team is already going to be doing up until that point, I'd rather just make the trip. Atlanta to Milwaukee, back to Atlanta to Milwaukee. Just do that a couple times. That's all you need to do. They're experts at it at this point. That's what I would prefer them to do than have to win 2 games and then go play in San Diego. That just feels like the nightmare scenario for this team if they are to get in. But okay, it is time to give our prediction. Jack, tomorrow, do the New York Mets win one of these 2 games to get into the playoffs?
I want to be positive so bad, Chris. I want to be positive, but I mean, you were just talking, and I was like, I can picture in my head the Marlins series of old, of, just win one game when you have a lead in the division and you make the playoffs. Win the last game of the season and you make the playoffs. I am going into tomorrow fully expecting them to get swept. I'm not going to lie. I can see the Braves win game 1, and even though they have no reason to play in game 2, they've already clinched the fact that they're going to San Diego if they win game 1. Why not knock your rival out of the playoffs by winning game 2 and sweeping? And then, maybe you get to see the Diamondbacks down the road. My prediction for tomorrow is that the Mets get swept, and I'm sorry to anyone positive who
I don't know if the camera's going to be able to do this justice. My palms are already sweaty. You talking about that made my palms sweaty, and we are recording this at 9:08 Eastern time on Sunday night. That is how nervous I already am. I am fully prepared to not sleep tonight. Again,
my heart is racing.
There is not a team I support more, and their results impact my mood more than the New York Mets. I'm a Jets guy. Absolutely got embarrassed by the Broncos earlier today. That is so far in the back of my mind right now. My focus is squarely on this team in these 2 games tomorrow. And I think I agree with you, but in order to be the contrarian here on the show, and just so we have some positive vibes, the Mets do win one of these 2 games tomorrow, but it's got to be the first one, because if they don't win the first one, I just think the nerves, the House of Horrors feel in that second game, because I can see it now, Jack. They lose the first game, and I can just see the tweets. Oh, it's fine. No Chris Sale on the other side. They're going to rest everybody. The Braves lineup's going to come out. People are going to be like, oh, if the Mets can't win this, if they can't beat this Braves team, they don't deserve to be in the playoffs. Well, guess what? Then you're going to get to see that on full display. I just think it's just going to be just a comedy of just epic proportion. Just errors all over the place, just bad at bats. They need to take that off the table. So if they're going to do this, it's got to be in the first one. They have to get after Schwellenbach. They have to get after him early, and they just need a good starting pitching performance. And I'm not talking what David Peterson did today. Give me 4 or 5 zeros. That's it. Give me 4 or 5 zeros, and then the Mets can turn it over to a bullpen that has been one of the strengths for them. You put up 4 or 5 zeros. The offense put a run or 2 on the board, and then we're all just going to cross our fingers and tense up and hope the bullpen can get enough outs. Edwin Diaz 6-out save is certainly going to be on the table in game 1 if it's required to win the game. The Carlos Mendoza has no problem rolling that dice, but I think they get one, and it's got to be the first one. So I will say that they win the first one tomorrow, and the New York Mets will be traveling to Milwaukee for a series with the Brewers.
I hope so. I've got my Bartolo Colon the impossible has happened shirt on from when he hit his home run in 2015 or 2016 to bring in the good vibes. So I'm hoping for the best. But yeah, I agree. It has to be that game 1 win or it's nothing.
So I will be back with a solo edition of this podcast Monday night after both games and where the Mets are playing, and we'll preview who they are playing, because Jack is off to a foreign country and doesn't have internet where he's staying. So it is going to be solo Bleav in Mets for a little bit until Jack is back, and hopefully we have a playoff run to break down over the course of this pod, and hopefully that means that the Mets win tomorrow and they are off to play the Brewers for a best of 3 and right back to where we just were starting on Friday. But that's going to do it for us. We appreciate you guys listening, appreciate you guys subscribing, following along with us here on this journey. And whether or not it ends tomorrow, it's been a fun ride, and the offseason is going to be fun regardless. But hopefully we have a few more postseason episodes. We have some postseason episodes that we have to do before we get to that point. And I said it after the last episode that it was the most important one. I have now changed my mind. There is the new most important outro of the year so far, because as always, let's go Mets.
Let's go Mets.